Hey everybody, Father Allen here. I'm over at Holy Family Church today, and today we're going to talk about chapter 3. So just as by way of review, we had spoken about how the first creation story is God creating his cosmic temple, and the sanctuary of God's temple is the Garden of Eden, and the Holy of Holies, the central part of the garden, is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The eldest son, Adam, was created by God to be the high priest of the garden. Now, Adam was told that he was to keep the garden, to protect it, and he was to protect it from the devil, from the serpent. So some might ask, why would God allow the serpent to be in the garden in the first place? Some theologians believe that what we're seeing is God testing Adam to see if he'll remain faithful as high priest. The serpent is subtle, a word that in the Hebrew language sounds much like the word nakedness. So he's subtly exploiting their nakedness and their innocence. Adam was to guard the garden from this ancient serpent and dragon who's intent on tempting and destroying him. The serpent contradicts the Lord's commandment about not eating of the tree. They didn't die physically when they ate of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, but they died spiritually by eating that forbidden fruit. You see, Satan took the truth and just twisted it a bit in order to deceive. And he still acts that way with us today. Satan is the deceiver. He is the liar. He is the father of lies. And so he is always trying to take truth, which is God, and twist it into something that we think is not true. He's trying to deceive us. Now, Adam was standing nearby Eve when all of this happened, and he was supposed to be taking care of his wife and taking care of the garden and protecting them. So why was he so silent as Eve was being interrogated by the serpent while he was asking her these questions? Did God really tell you not to eat of this tree? And Adam is not saying anything at all. Jesus, the new Adam, is going to die by laying down his life for his bride, the church, on a tree by his obedience to the Father. Now, if only Adam had done the same thing. In verse 6, we see what kind of fruit it is that's on the tree. But the Bible doesn't explicitly tell us. Popularly, it's thought to be an apple. Apples are red, and the color red traditionally symbolizes danger. It's why stop signs are the color red, to gain attention, to say danger, stop. In Latin, the word apple is malus, which also means evil. But the fruit really is knowledge of good and evil fruit, which, according to verse 324, hasn't been seen since. This fruit gives some sort of special knowledge, which includes a consciousness of sexuality. So after eating of this fruit, Adam and Eve cover the parts of themselves that differentiate them from one another. Good and evil are a moral construct, but the words in Hebrew can also mean order and disorder. So in a sense, you could read it as Adam and Eve brought disorder into God's order that he created. In verse 7, it talks about them covering themselves with fig leaves. Fig leaves would be the largest leaves found in Canaan. And the fig, because it produces so much fruit, is also traditionally, in ancient times, was considered a symbol of fertility. So it's significant that a fig leaf is used to cover the reproductive organs of the man and the woman. Jesus cursed a tree in Matthew 21, verses 19 to 21, because it was not being fruitful. It wasn't doing what it was supposed to do, to make fruit. It was not being fertile. As we move on to verse 8 in chapter 3, we're told that God comes down to the garden in the cool of the day. This could also be translated as the calm before the storm. Adam and Eve heard the sound or the thunder of God in the garden as the Lord moved about in the wind of the storm looking for them. It's understandable why they would be hiding after disobeying such awesome power. In Genesis 3:15, we have a first prophecy of Jesus, where we're told that he will crush the head of the devil on the cross, but will suffer in the process. This is called the Proto-Evangelium, the very first gospel. Proto means first, Evangelium is Latin for gospel, good news. Verse 3:15, the first gospel. And it shows everyone will be tempted by the devil, yet will have the power to withstand Satan's enticements, and God's plan for the salvation of mankind can never be sabotaged by Satan. In verse 18, in ancient writings, paradise is a place where gems and precious stones grow on plants rather than thorns and thistles. You may notice in many of our churches that there are columns with leaves at the top. This is a symbol of the church as being paradise, as being the Garden of Eden, where we enter in and we encounter God through the sacramental presence of Jesus Christ, found in the tabernacle and on the altar at Mass. You may notice that in Genesis verse 19, death has entered the world now because of that sin of disobedience. A new Adam, Jesus, out of complete obedience to the Father, will enter into another garden, one called Gethsemane, and he'll sweat drops of blood and wear a crown of thorns, as Adam now tills the land only by the sweat of his brow and yields from the ground only thorns and thistles. The new Adam will go to the new tree of life, the cross, and will fall into a deep sleep of death, as Adam was put into a deep sleep when from the side of the Adam came Eve. From the side of the new Adam will come forth the new Eve, the church, whom Mary personifies. The fruit of this new tree will be the Eucharist, of which all who eat of it will live forever. So where Adam was disobedient in the garden, Jesus was obedient in the Garden of Gethsemane. While Adam had to sweat to work the land, Jesus sweat drops of blood. Where Adam raised thorns and thistles, Jesus wore a crown of thorns. Where Adam went to the tree to eat of it, Jesus went to the new tree of life, the cross, to be nailed to it. Where Adam was put into a deep sleep, Jesus accepted the sleep of death. With Adam, Eve came forth from his side. With Jesus, the new Eve, the church, came forth from his side. And with Adam, eating of the fruit led to death, whereas with Jesus, the new fruit is the Eucharist, which gives eternal life. Genesis continues with verse 21, where God makes Adam and Eve clothes from animal skins. With this first animal, the first animal is killed to cover sin. We can conjecture it probably was a lamb. And God must have taught Adam the way to atone for sin was by an animal blood offering. This was the first time that Adam would have seen physical death. No doubt, taking life and seeing the life blood of an animal spilt out on the ground left a big impression on him on how serious the consequence of sin really is. Sin equals death. We need only to look at the cross above. In Genesis 3:22, there are two trees in the garden, the tree of the knowledge of God, good and evil, and the other was the tree of life. Why would God, who hadn't forbidden eating from the tree of life, now protect it so carefully from humans by stationing cherubim or angels and fiery swords around it? Well, God was so quick to kick Adam and Eve from the garden, not so much as punishment, but because God feared that the man would put forth his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever. You see, the effect of this would have been to make sinners, and thus also sin, immortal. What God created as good and perfect was now imperfect and had the potential for great harm. God was merciful to kick humans out of the garden. Imagine having eternal life but living it forever in an imperfect world. Imagine living eternally with evil. In other words, the tree of life doesn't offer an easy way out of the mess that was unleashed by Adam and Eve when they ate of the fruit. Things had to be set right first. Good and evil had to be dealt with in this imperfect world before we could ever return to the immortality of Eden's perfection. In verse 24, the fiery sword is a symbol of war and dissension. Weapons of war, such as the blade of a sword, show how the order and peace of paradise have been lost. The cherubim are one of the choirs of angels who serve as guardians of God's presence. Adam wasn't able to keep the garden or guard it from evil, so God assigns the angels to do the job. Adam and Eve then move east out of the garden. As sin grows, humanity will begin to move further and further to the east. Salvation will come from the east in Jesus Christ, who took on our worst and fullest order of sinfulness. Churches traditionally face east for that reason. Christ will return from that direction, the sunrise, the light that dispels all darkness. When God separated us from the tree of life, he never meant to forbid us from it forever, only until the proper time. That tree of life appears again in the Bible, in the book of Revelation. There, John receives a vision of the river of life-giving water, sparkling like crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb. And on either side of the river grew the tree of life that produces fruit 12 times a year, once each month. The leaves of the trees serve as medicine for the nations. You can read that in the book of Revelation, chapter 22, verses 1 through 3. We see Eden restored and accessible to us once again. The fruit is abundant and always available any time of the year because the Lamb, Jesus, whose throne produces the water to nourish the tree of life, is always there. The obedience of Jesus by dying on the tree of the cross reversed Adam's disobedience and allowed all of us to return to Eden. This is why God planted two trees. One had the potential to lead us out of Eden if we disobeyed. The other, when the proper time of salvation arrived, could lead us back to paradise with God because of Jesus' obedience. God bless you all. We'll be back soon with chapter 4.